to Roll for Origin, where we talk about the history of supers, tabletop role-playing games. I'm Jay. I'm a game designer and author of Play Fearless. I'm here with Lowell.
I'm Lowell, and I'm the community manager for Open Hearth Gaming, and I'm also the designer of Hearts of Lowell.
Today's role-playing game is Underground from Mayfair in 1993. It is a far, far future of 2021 about decommissioned, super enhanced veterans with mental issues as they try to readjust into society. Buckle up! This gets weirder.
Yes.
I remember playing this one, and I was probably too young for the material, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot to the premise. In a nutshell, in this timeline, a crashed alien spacecraft leads to the discovery and advancement of biotech. The world gets more chaotic, systems break down, and the inevitable decay of basic rights, corporations gaining autonomy and authority, and everything else we've seen from the cyberpunk dystopian playbook. Corporations are then hired to fight wars on a much larger scale than modern private military companies. Nations handle all their military operations through these companies. Those companies have developed super soldiers with various implants, weapons, and weird powers. However, these new powers have caused severe physical and mental stress to the user. To help recruits adjust, corporations use Slumberland, and I say that in scare quotes.
Yes.
This is an immersive VR simulation where augmented soldiers live out a life as comic book superhero with 4-color morality, allowing them to adjust mentally to having these powers. When they get out of this 18-month process, they remember 2 lives, the VR one and the one before they went into the tank. Then they're dispatched into combat zones. So all the characters have gone through this, creating an overlay memory, super self, and also a career as a high-powered mercenary working for corporate overlords who in turn are hired by governments. Eventually, these soldiers muster out. It's implied that corporations dump these folks out before they become broken and dangerous. There's a lot of the mechanics built around these powers and the drawbacks, which come both from having them and from using them. The game takes up with your characters having been kicked out of the service and trying to find your way in a weird cyberpunk dystopia filled with people who fear vets, folks who want to exploit vets, and people who are these vets with a range of problems, not least of which may be imagining themselves as heroes. Wikipedia describes this as a satirical, grim, and gritty superhero game. I don't think it's actually superhero, but it is supers. It's also a satire coming out of the vibe and culture of the late 1980s and early 1990s into the world of role-playing, still at that point dominated by men, boys, and man-boys.
It's a wild game. I can't wait to hear about your experience playing this. It's a strange game also in the history of gaming. So people who know Mayfair these days probably know Mayfair from board games. And Mayfair began as a board game company, but then they started pivoting into doing third-party RPG supplement. They did a bunch of stuff with roll aids and things like that.
Right.
There were some legal arguments about who could use trademarks and so on. They had some battles with Palladium in that.
Right.
But they kept working in role-playing, and in the mid-1980s, they got the DC license after losing out on the Marvel Comics one. So they wanted Marvel, they didn't get that, they got DC. And that became DC Heroes, and that really did well. But immediately after that first box set was put out, DC Comics immediately burned them because right afterwards they did Crisis on Infinite Earths. That made all of the lore, the characters, and everything immediately out of date.
Right.
It was very strange. I remember being there when all of that happened.
Yeah.
DC Heroes, that first edition, did well enough that they would continue on. They would do 2 more editions of DC Heroes, plus they did a micro Batman RPG before in 1994 they decided to drop the license along with most of their role-playing stuff. It's worth noting, by the way, I'll just mention this because it still bugs me. This happened again with DC Adventures from Green Ronin. They did an amazing adaptations of Mutants and Masterminds third edition. It's really sharp. The books are beautiful. It's really well done. And immediately after it was published, DC's Flashpoint and New 52 completely changed the history, the
Right.
look, the
Right.
lore of the characters and setting. It was wild. I was in there doing some stuff for DC just before that hit, and I knew it was coming. And
That's terrible.
oof,
That's
yeah.
terrible. I remember that, and you're right. Those books were beautiful. I say I'm not a big DC fan, but I had those, and the games were, even the Mayfair stuff was good. I enjoyed it, right? Yeah.
Underground itself is built on what ended up being called MEGS, which stands for the Mayfair Exponential Game System. It powered all three versions of DC Heroes. Like Champions, that we're going to be talking about eventually, it's a point buy system. Now, it's very complicated in this version. It's wild. We'll come back to how it works in here. Eventually, Megs would be used in another Supers game, The Blood of Heroes in 1998, which was an attempt to kind of retro clone DC Heroes, and it didn't go very well. Megs in Underground has a lot stripped out from it, and it also changes the way scaling works for values, which is something I'm going to come back to later. But it is the same system if you kind of squint your eyes. It's worth noting that Underground's really Ray Winninger's project. As I understand it, he was the developer, the lead, the mind behind it. Winninger wrote a ton of material for Marvel and DC Heroes, and eventually would write for Mutants and Masterminds. Also contributed to Chill, Torg, Star Wars D6.
Right, right.
And for a time, he was the executive producer of WotC's D&D studio. He took over when Mike Merle stepped out. Underground, that cyberpunk vibe is definitely more supers than superheroes. And that made it unique in superhero gaming. We didn't get a lot of high concept supers games before this. They were much more either licensed or very conventional.
Right.
Underground is the first, I think, really to do that. And it definitely taps into the veins of cyberpunk, nihilism, and dark comedy, which you got in things like, at that point, Cyberpunk 2020, World of Darkness, Human Occupied Landfill. I'll mention that. Another game that it kind of reminds me of. And there were some other over-the-top violence games around that time, thinking particularly of SLA Industries.
Right, yeah.
There were a lot of these sort of indie games with weird graphic design and a focus on hyperviolence and buying into an indie punk aesthetic. Underground buys into some of that vibe, but it's also really well produced. I mean, Mayfair had some serious money and they had real graphic design chops at this point in time. First of all, the Underground book is full color, glossy. It's a real rarity in 1993. It tries to build a kind of a high-tech look with lots of white space, central text column with black borders and sidebars on the right or left. That works fine in the core book. In some of the supplements I looked at, they have the sidebars right up against the text, and it's a little problematic. They have lots of hypertext information in those sidebars. They'll have a word in a particular color, and then they have it in that color in the sidebar. It's hard to read. I'm going to tell you now, mind you, I'm going from the scanned copy that's available on drive-through,
Right.
and it's not a great scan. It's better than some I've seen, but it's not great. Mayfair released several supplements for Underground, including the Notebook, which was a landscape format 3-ring binder that you would put these documents that you got in it. It came with a bunch of material in that, and the idea was to have new releases that you would interlard into that. They never released standalone supplements for that, but almost all of the books would come with these data sheets that you could then put into that. I think there were a few other companies that did
Right.
three-ring binders.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think I think that the DC handbook ones were, maybe the Marvel ones were. And it's a neat idea. Like, it's not a bad idea. Mayfair ended up releasing 8 products total, including a GM screen and a box set which covered Los Angeles. And that was in 93 and 94. The only non-Mayfair publication was Atlas Games, which at that point was still doing a lot of third-party modules and things, released a module for it. But by 94, RPGs were dead at Mayfair. According to Designers and Dragons, by that point, in fact, by late in 93, early 94, even as they were still doing things, Mayfair let go all of their RPG staff and just dumped out of that.
Wow.
And for, I would say, the next decade, you could find bundles of almost all the underground products for super cheap. Individual books you could find on the racks of discount sellers at conventions. I worked in a game store. We went to distributors, and I would see these like shrink wrapped sets of everything.
Right, right.
It was wild. They clearly sunk a lot of money into this because that's 8 products,
Right.
all nice, beautiful products done in a 2-year span. And by the end of the first year of that 2-year span, they're already like, okay, we're getting out of RPGs.
Right, we're done. Yeah, we're done.
Yeah.
That's crazy. That is crazy.
Yeah. So that's where it fits in the history of games in general.
What I didn't know, because again, I was a kid when I jumped into this. What's fascinating now is figuring out what was going on in comics history, games history. And now I think I also want to dig into Ray's life. What's his background before publishing, right? The vet angle today, because I'm a vet, I want to know where that comes from. As a kid, I thought nothing of it.
Right.
So that's those are questions I still have that I don't have answers to on this podcast. Maybe we circle back around to it.
Yeah.
But comics-wise, Underground is an odd beast with the vibes of later 90s Iron Age aesthetics and design, but coming out before Leaffield and Image fully set that template. The biggest and clearest touchstone in terms of theme, concept, and art is Martial Law by Kevin O'Neill and Pat Mills, 1987-1992. That satire of superhero comics had a lot of DNA from Judge Dredd, which makes sense since both Mills and O'Neill came to Martial Law having worked on 2000 AD. Of that comic, the title character Martial Law is the government-sanctioned superhero hunter, aka law enforcement officer or cape killer, with superpowers in the city of San Futuro, the near-future metropolis built from the ruins of San Francisco following a massive earthquake. Law's job is to take down other superheroes who have gone rogue, which he does with the maximum force and with great pleasure. Underground also clearly draws visual and stylistic inspiration from Frank Miller's comics, especially The Dark Knight, 1986, Ronin from 1983 to 1984, and Give Me Liberty with artist Dave Gibbons in 1990. But most importantly, Hardboiled, 1990 to 1992, which Miller worked on with artist Jeff Darrow. Importantly, Darrow provides the cover art for Underground, as well as many of the key full-page images throughout. It feels like Darrow set the template, with other artists building on those concepts. You can also see influences from Alan Moore's version of Miracle Man. I love Miracle Man.
Oh, yeah.
Especially the idea of superhumans being trained via immersive simulation in a four-color comics ideology to make them malleable. The Slumberland system is pretty much lifted directly from that. From alternate comics, the core book cites Charles Burns and his El Borba comics, and you can see a lot of that influence visually and thematically. It also feels like there's some Love and Rockets vibe to the art in those places. Love and Rockets was another series that, again, my cousin Thomas, he's like, I don't want that. You can read that. I got those, and those were great. Again, I think I was way too young for a lot of that stuff, but I sucked it down. So
yeah, my sister's about 5 years older than me, and she was very much into indie comics and stuff, and that's how I read Charles Burns and and Linda Berry and Zippy the Pinhead and a lot of weird
Yeah, yeah.
stuff that was in that range.
No, I'm with you. I'm with you. Underground grabs onto the over-the-top violence and imagery of many of these comics with an eye towards satire and subversion. But it also clearly appears at a tipping point when those things being satirized would in fact become mainstream with things like Spawn, Stormwatch, Youngblood, and so on. What it parodied ended up quickly becoming the mainstream. That's very, very true. And for me as a young guy, right, I remember reading Spawn. Stormwatch, again, was a favorite of mine.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's a straight line for me, and I don't see the satire until I become older.
So tell us about your experience playing this. Like, we have our back and forth about things we want to consider with this, but I'm really curious, how did you choose to do Underground? And then what happened when you actually kind of tried to get it to the table?
Let me start with where I am in school. I grew up Jersey City, Hoboken. I had an English teacher that recognized I don't belong in that public school system. There was nothing. I spent my days hanging out in the library. They couldn't do anything for me in the classrooms. She got me transferred a couple of counties over to a gifted and talented program. And so when you do that, I am no longer the highest performing kid. I'm now the lowest performing kid. And so I say that to say the kids that invited me, and it's a very diverse classroom, the kids that invited me to play D&D, Redbox D&D, this is a group where it's 50-50, 50% girls, 50% guys. There are 3 girls and 3 guys in this group, and we're playing these games. And we moved to superhero games, and I think we came off Villains and Vigilantes into Underground. And I think it was me and Norman that picked Underground. But we had no idea what it was. The color, the cover art looked cool. The premise looked cool, right? It's in that what we think is gray area superheroes, but still superheroes. Vigilantes, maybe more Wolverine Logan of the 80s and 90s, less golden era Superman. And so we think it's edgy. All the satire and stuff is missed on us. And again, certainly me, because, I'm in for the superhero stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere in character generation is where the girls are like, what the fuck is this? What are we doing? Right? Right? They pick it up clearly. And over 2 sessions, we get to character generation. We're trying to play. Norman's running the game. We're trying to play through a session. And the girls have picked up on, this isn't superhero stuff that we've read. I don't know what the hell this is, but this is not that, and you're missing it. And we're having discussions about, what is this game? It's not about with great power comes responsibility, right? It's not like the X-Men where we're trying to get our people all together and save them for people who fear us. There's something wrong. They're not even superheroes. And like I said, over 2 sessions are big discussions about, what is this? And it was mostly girls versus the guys, not in a bad argumentative way. And I was the last to see it. I couldn't see it. I may have broke maybe 10 minutes after Norman, and I think he just gave up. Let's just play something different. And I'm like, well, no, this is superhero stuff. Let's do this, right? Yeah, I didn't see it. And today, for me, it's funny to realize that is the girls in the group that I wish I could call them up and ask, what was it that made you see that as clear as you saw it during character generation? If I sit down and think through it and think about it, the only weird part for me was Slumberland. What is that about? That feels odd. Maybe we just chuck that later. That was the only off or odd thing.
There's a weird thing in looking at it that I don't think Mayfair knew exactly how to position it. Part of it is because they had been the DC Heroes people.
Right.
They weren't the cyberpunk people or anything like that. And there wasn't anything that was similar. It's such a fully realized concept. How do you sell that? How do you pivot from the family-friendly supers to this? Feels like they thought, we're going to break ground. We're going to start a whole new direction. White Wolf has managed to create a whole new niche.
Oh, that's fair.
We're going to do that.
Right.
We're going to find that way. In fact, there are a couple of the White Wolf people that are mentioned in the notes at the beginning. And there's nothing else that looks like Underground.
No, no, there's a
Even the highest production pieces that they had for DC Heroes, like the Heroes Handbooks and the Watchmen books, and
right,
they were not as glossy and wild as these
right,
were. And that kind of overproduction, that wasn't a thing yet. We had TSR box sets and things like
right,
that, and we expected that
right,
from TSR. Other thing I think about is this is before the internet. So the only way that you're getting word of mouth is if somebody is buying it in your game store,
right.
they're liking it and they're running it, or maybe you're reading a review in one of the magazines like Shadow's and Dragon. That's it. There's no internet to have somebody go, oh, this is really cool. This is what's going on. Maybe there might be alt.rec.underground somewhere on a bulletin board.
No, you're right, because I'm pretty sure Norman and I got it from if not Dragon, some other adjacent magazine. And then the next thing you know, we're in Paramus at the mall looking for it, and the shop owner talks it up. And so he grabs one, I grab one. So it is all word of mouth, right?
Yeah.
Or magazine, right? Yeah. The art still, even today, grabs me because it's so different, so striking. And I remember the impact it had on me as a kid because I've never seen anything like it. And it made me feel stuff. I don't have all the words, right? It's not like there's box art that gets you hyped. This got you hyped, but you're also thinking there's something uncanny about it. And that sold me. I was in.
Yeah, there's a thing where we've got games that have big guns and
Mm-hmm.
that kind of look like riffs and a number of the mecha games and things like that. But yeah, and this has it. Like you look at the book and you're like, oh, we're going to be really cool, cyborg warriors. But
Right.
then you look closer and you realize just how grotesque everything is presented.
Right. Right. There's something subliminal about it. That's the word. There's something subliminal, and I didn't get it at the time as a kid, but it grabbed me, and I didn't understand why. That's what I remember is most striking. And even, like I said, sitting down, reading through the rules, making characters. I was in, Norman was in, my friend Dallas, he was pretty much in. We were ready to go, and we just couldn't see underneath what really was. I didn't know enough about vets, and I didn't understand enough about satire to know that that's what that was. We were all in as if it was real.
I mean, jump around in our list notes and things to talk about. The character creation is wild. It's a multi-step process. You have to come up with a character concept, and then you've got money to spend on your stats and your powers. You also have to choose what service you went through. There's some psychological profiles, whether you have therapy. There's some roles that go on.
You're right. You're right.
It switches between, okay, now you spend this to get this to, okay, now you spend this and now you get to make a roll and maybe you'll get something, part or nothing of what you spent your money on. It's such a weird old design decision to have like 10 steps. It's wild to me.
You're right. But let me tell you what little J was thinking at the time. Traveler's out, right? And that's the first time we see walking through life paths, making choices, rolling dice. Did I survive? Oh, I died in character creation. That's crazy. Let's do this again. So it's almost like a mini game that we're playing at the table. And I remember some sessions, we're just sitting around making characters and laughing and talking about the what ifs of the character generation. When we get here to Underground, it's like that on steroids. And maybe that's why we can't see what the girls are talking about, is that we're so deep into this mini game and talking about the possibilities and the what ifs that we're looking forward to playing with what ends up as the result in the next session. We can't see the forest for the trees. And so, yeah, for me, making characters was a mini game, and we were engaged in it. We were doing it. We weren't paying attention to what it was about.
What is your take on it? I want to move us forward here. And again, we're bouncing around on some things, but you mentioned this earlier.
Yeah.
A while ago during Memorial Day, you had a post talking about your experience being a veteran. So now coming at this game and its premise
Hmm.
of vets and of damaged vets, what do you think of that? What's your take on that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a good question. And I hate when people say that's a good question. Let me start with, as human beings, we are capable of having two incongruent thoughts at the same time, and there's friction there. I wouldn't play this game today. I would leave this game on the shelf. I would not want to have to mess with the vet material in it because it's too real for me. I know vets that transition out from overseas and they don't make the jump, right? To being civilians and transitioning to something solid. A lot of them end up as transient or suicidal. And these are just regular vets. These may not be vets that were in combat theaters or anything like that. It gets worse the more hostile places that you've been. I wouldn't want to play with that or engage with that at that level, right? When we talk about colonial marines and aliens, that's one thing. We're not talking about any PTSD, mental issues. Those aren't game mechanics. And those are left up to individual tables to bring in as they want or not. But this game, that's part of the mechanics. That's part of the fiction. And today, this would be a game I pass on. It might make me mad, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I wouldn't want to deal with this game at that level today. I'd let it go.
It is wild to me that in mid 90s, we can have this kind of take on PTSD. That the PTSD really is the key mechanic that's happening to your characters on a couple of levels. We've got it kind of with the cartoony Slumberland is creating this cognitive dissonance for you, but then you've got the combat theater stuff, and the game builds that in. Like,
Right.
as you probably want to buy some therapy during character creation.
Right.
So you don't go off. And then during play, yeah, you're going to have psychoses. Games have never been particularly good at simulating mental health. Well,
no, they have
wow.
not. Right.
Wow.
Right. Now, so you're right. And I remember as we're prepping for this episode, I remember thinking, how did that game get away with doing those things? And I think my thought was PTSD is not a term we have yet in the 90s, right? The early 90s. It's not till after, I want to say, the first Gulf War that, I mean, the conditions exist, but I feel like we didn't have a term. If we did, it's all the derogatory terms like that person's shell-shocked or war traumatized or all those things, right? I think PTSD, whether it existed or not, it wasn't mainstream. I didn't know about it while I'm playing this game. And I wonder if it was a mainstream term, would this game even have made it to the shelves, right? Or would it have gotten made?
There's an interesting intent here, and you can read it in several places. Like, they really want to satirize the military-industrial context,
Right,
complex.
yes.
That's,
Yeah.
It's anti-corporate,
Right.
but it's also in that way that it has that nihilism where it's making fun of everything.
Everything, right.
There is nothing of value because everything is undercut. And there's some other things in the game besides the PTSD. There's estrogen, which is the cheap liquor that people can pick up, that they show people having breast enhancements. And
They do.
it's a weird in passing thing that you're not sure what is the tone, what is the vibe here, what are we making fun of. There's also the cannibalism. Content warning here. There's a lot of cannibalism in this game. Corporate cannibalism. Oh gosh, and the prefrontals. Do you remember them?
I forgot about that. No, you're right.
Oh,
yeah.
shit.
This game was terrible. This game was terrible. And what's crazy is I don't even know. Like, I'm not 18, right? And somebody sells me this game, right? I put some money across the table and they let me walk out the store with this game.
Oh my gosh. It's such an interesting tempt.
No, for sure. So I brought up earlier, I'm in this gifted and talented program. I try real hard not to call it the nerd farm. I could spend a whole nother episode about why I hate that approach to education, even if it was good for me. I think there has to be better ways to do that for kids. But the deal is we are all, my whole gaming group, we're all in that program. So we're all nerds of different scales, different sorts. I think the thing that we have in common is for this game, because it uses the Mayfair scaling system, we're all champions nerds too. I don't want to call it math, but there's something about the way the mechanics have a logical consistency to them. Some point buy systems end up this way, not all of them. But Mayfair, I always liked the DC Heroes. I always liked that system, the Meg system, because it had a kind of internal logic to it that we could work with, we could do stuff with, you can extrapolate off of. And I think for us, that was fantastic. That was good. And that was also part of the draw. I think we went on later to play lots of DC Hero stuff, along with Champion stuff, because it was mentally stimulating to mess around with those mechanics.
It was great to be able to calculate out those numbers. I really liked DC Heroes. It had a couple of problems. When we get to DC Heroes, we'll talk about it. But the only thing is, so the MEG system, the Mayfair Exponential Game System, the basic idea is that there are values for different things like speed, time, weight, and so on. And the idea is that each value doubles. So a value of 2 is twice what a value of 1 is, and a value of 3 is 4 times what a value of 1 is, and so on. It goes up exponentially. And that's great. That exponential thing is great. It's super fun at the table. It allows you to calculate how long it takes you to do things. It makes you able to do big superpowers. And I really like that. But when it's done in Underground, rather than each step doubling, they say every third step doubles. And suddenly I'm like, wait, what?
Right. It's kind of broken then, yeah.
And there are some formulas that you can play with it, but it's throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Like you're throwing out to get that simplicity so you can do lower tier stuff. You're throwing out what's really kind of an amazing system.
No, I agree. And we can talk about it when we get to DC Heroes. I think everything's nice. And then there's a character like Batman where he's on the margins between what might be obviously superhuman and not. And they skirt the line with Batman because obviously he's human, right? He shouldn't be able to do, but he has some numbers that put him in that superhuman lower end, but there's no lower end. It's either a 2 or it's not, or it's a 3 or it's not. And we live with that. But when you get to Underground, because you're doubling every 3, then you get some more weirder stuff. It feels like that problem becomes bigger. And there's no real nice way to solve that, to math it out.
I think there's a whole episode to be looking at how different games, especially the licensed ones, try to get around that with the choice. Do we just fudge it, or do we say, okay, well, these numbers are significantly higher than this person's numbers, or do we Cortex it and flatten it?
Right, flatten it, right. And Cortex does a nice job of flattening it with the dice.
Right. And then there's Masks that just goes, I don't even care.
I don't even care.
Yeah.
Right. Just roll the dice. Let me know what you got. We'll work it out. I don't even care. No, but Mayfair is very tied to the math. And so it matters on the math side before you roll the dice.
There are, I would say, some really interesting bits in this, and they're kind of buried at the back for me. One of the problems I have throughout this book is, what the fuck are we supposed to be doing?
Right.
The characters have this past identity as a supers thing, and it's almost like that's kind of put in to give us a little bit of skin for their perception. Maybe they want to be vigilantes, maybe they don't. And then they've got this wartime experience. But the book doesn't do a great job of saying this is what you need to be doing in that main book. Maybe the LA source book might have more, but boy, that first book does not tell us. And especially because you choose these archetypes during character creation, that might mean that your party is in very different directions. If you're playing like a nomad character versus a government operative versus an anti-government operative, and I don't see the pieces, but there is one place where they do, and this is the kind of thing I love. They have these campaign parameters.
Okay.
Basically, the idea is that for an area and they have this kind of stats for LA, but they kind of break them down by neighborhoods. They have these stats, and your actions can generate points that you can spend to increase the parameters within an area. Larger areas cost more. And so you've got wealth, safety, government purity, quality of life, education, necessities, and take home pay. And it's interesting. You can spend time. There's some talk about, okay, if your characters take actions, that's cool. That's a little bit more close to what Rich Rogers is doing with Hit the Streets, Defend the Block.
Right.
We are characters that want to fix things and want to change things. It's so buried at the back. And this is just covered in 5 pages, but it's such a good idea. Other thing it does is it's a zero-sum game. So I hate this. If you increase one of these things, you have to take another one down. And that's how unsatisfying is that? I've done a lot of work. I've done all these efforts. I mean, that may be the message of the game. You do all this work and you don't get anything.
Right.
But it's, oof.
No, I'm with you. I don't like the zero, because it's still status quo. I'm just moving chairs around.
Mm-hmm.
I totally missed that section. I did.
Yeah.
I don't know if that would have changed our game back then. I totally didn't know about that. I think we all just assume we're going to make characters and Norman's going to figure out what we're doing, right?
Yeah. No, it's buried at the back. The place where I see it actually used is I managed to look at a couple of the supplements. So they have a LA book, and this is so of its age. So we got our LA box set. We've got the Player's Handbook, which is the obligatory new stuff for characters. Here's your new powers. Here's your new skills. Here's your new archetypes. It's a player splat book. And then Fully Strapped, Always Packed, which is the obligatory guns, armor, and weapons splat book.
Right. I remember that.
And then another book called Techno, which is all the other non-weapons equipment. These were the days when you could sell a 128-page book for a game that was just lists of fucking gear. And pictures of weapons and lists and different stat numbers, and people be like, well, I've got to get that.
I got to get that.
I remember this with the Q manual for James Bond. Palladium did those books of weapons.
Yeah, no, it did. And I want to say they had like 2 or 3, because there were like archaic weapons and then modern weapons, right?
There's a GM's Companion book. There's the notebook I mentioned earlier. There are then, besides the LA, there are 2 other setting books. One of them is called Steel Deep, and it's the Moon source book.
Oh, wow. I didn't know about this.
And then the other one is Ways and Means. This is the Washington, D.C. source book. We've got 2 location books that go, okay, you're going completely different campaign premises. Ways and Means is wild. For one thing, it's one of the first credits for Robin Laws.
Wow, okay.
Which is ironic given that he's Canadian.
Yes.
At this time, he'd done some indie game stuff and some stuff for Over the Edge. And I actually asked him on Blue Sky what was up with this. And he was very polite, said it was very fun to play in Winnegar's backyard. And it was a delight. Didn't say anything else. So
very polite, very polite.
But it must have been like that Ways and Means book is thick. It is a ton of stuff. Basically, there's a Washington, D.C. that's floating above the old Washington, D.C.
Right.
And it's completely locked down. It's a wildly different campaign setting. If your players had played in regular Underground and went here, you'd be like going, what is going on?
What is this? Right.
One of the things it does in the big section at the back is it does take those 8 aspects and goes, okay, what does it look like when this goes up? What does it look like when this goes down? It is, though, the scan of that is like all of the problems with layout of that game are so bad there. It's not Mork Borg hard to read, but it is bad enough with the scans. So,
I think one of the things I do like, and I like to see more of, there's a cycle, I think you hint at it, where everyone's psychotic, they're dealing with stress, fallout from their powers, kind of like a humanity loss concept, right? I like the idea that mechanically, I'm doing stuff, I'm using my powers, that puts me in a bad or a negative position. I've got to mitigate that some kind of way before something else happens. Double Cross does this, where I use my powers, and at the end of the game, I have to score. And if it's too high, I become the monster that we've been fighting all this time. I like when games have a cycle, and it's nice to see it this early where you're out doing stuff, you're running up the score, and then you've got to figure out how to mitigate that. I don't remember, because we never got our game off the ground, how Underground handles bringing that into something manageable, or does it just run away?
The way as I read it, it falls into some of the traps of, okay, cyberpunk augments equals loss of humanity and then psychotic stuff. But a lot more of it is that you're using these powers that are really hard to use. They have negative effects on you. Like if you use a mental power, you're getting blowback from that. And if you're spitting acid, that hurts your throat. Those are all interesting things. They've got it so that there's a stress that builds up, and eventually you kind of hit a breakdown point, and there's kind of a break that occurs, and then you reset, and there's some ways to do therapy or some ways to mitigate that in play, but it's kind of a hard set of choices. Like, that's really interesting, and I didn't realize that Double Cross did something like that too.
Yeah.
You said you would have a hard time running this at the table and wouldn't want to. I can understand that. By the way, I referenced prefrontals before and didn't explain what that was. These are mentally challenged clones. And one of the questions is about their status in the game. And it feels really, really icky to me.
Yeah.
I understand what they're getting at and why they're talking about that. There's some references like the immigrant experience and so on in there. But given the sort of push to some kinds of eugenics that we're seeing today, it feels really, really wildly, unpleasant. And I think that's generally for me what is the problem is, how would you put this at the table without becoming what you were supposed to be satirizing? Like, how do you really do a satirical game and maintain that tone over play? Right. I mean, the only game I can think of that does that is Paranoia.
It's Paranoia, right? But you go in, and I don't know. Yeah, so I don't know why I feel different about Paranoia than this game. Because I will play Paranoia, I will run it, I will play it at the drop of a hat. I think everybody's in on the bit.
Everybody's in on the bit. I don't think Underground gets you in on the bit, and it doesn't convey to the players this in an easy way. It's incumbent on the GM to sell this whole setting.
And my initial thought when I saw this was on the list and we were going to cover this, my thought was, for every game we cover, I'd like to be able to say, here's what I might do with this on the table if I had to run it. And the only thing I could come up with doesn't lean into or fit what the game says it's about. And my thought is, today it's, 2025, we're past the far future date this game is set in of 2021. And my thought was, maybe there's an organization big enough or government big enough that says, you know what, let's clean this mess up. And they put something together to go out and clean up all this. And maybe there's a new 5.0 version of all these superpowered vets. And now we got to clean up all the old ones. Mm-hmm. And that would be the premise I push. But that becomes too serious and not satirical, and I'm like, that I don't think I have it. I don't know what I would do with, and I have no idea what Norman was going to do with this game. Right?
I would suspect if you asked him, he had no idea.
Right.
Wow, what a striking game! I'm so used to these striking games being like a done in one or a 2-volume thing. To see something like this is wild, just wild.
Yeah, because like you said, they put out a lot of material. And in my head, my thought was, without the context, my thought would have been, this game must have had a following, right? There must have been some folks that were in, and they had something here. Let's find out what that is. And I would spend some time trying to figure out, what is it? What's happening here? What's going on here? I'm missing something. What am I missing?
Yeah, I think we see them picking up on the cultural context of comics and the vibes that are going on there, and they certainly were reaching for, I hate to say this, but the zeitgeist.
Right.
But I think just because of the time and the industry, RPGs were not here at that point. And by the time that maybe they would have been, people were already buying into the full Iron Age.
That's right.
Belts and pouches, Stabby McStabberson heroes.
No, you're right. That is correct. And we know every time the RPG market shrank back then, that means we're down to fantasy stuff or sci-fantasy stuff. Superheroes go by the wayside, and anything, or indie, right? Anything outside of fantasy, science fantasy, ends up disappearing or becomes indie. So, yeah.
Anything else you want to say about Underground?
No, today I don't know. I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole.
That's right.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I have nostalgia for it, but I think it's misplaced. When I look into it, and I'm okay with that. I wouldn't touch it today. Yeah, I wouldn't pitch it. And it hurts to say that. I don't want to say anything bad. I don't want to pee in other people's cornflakes. I couldn't do it for me.
I think it's of a time.
Right.
There are a bunch of games that are of that era, of those times, that we passed by. We just wouldn't do it this way. Listeners, that is our show. Roll for Origin is a production of Open Hearth Gaming Community. You can find out more at openhearthgaming.com, and you can check out everything there. We have a podcast feed for Around the Hearth, which covers all of our podcasts. Rate, review, comment, all of those things. Help us, share it, all of that. Jay, thanks so much.
Thank you. This was fun. I enjoyed revisiting Underground and all the cringiness.
It was quite a reread. Listeners, that's our show.